Maybe you want to understand ad tech like a pro, get into the weeds on a particular topic, or something in between. That's what Shiv Gupta is helping address in the advertising industry. He's the founder of U of Digital, an education company that focuses on teaching professionals about digital advertising, ad tech, and martech. Shiv shares his perspective on why ad tech education is more important than ever before, who needs to know more and why, topics to prioritize, and much, much more. Let's get into this episode with Shiv now. Well, thanks for joining me today, Shiv. I'm excited to talk about everything that's happening from an ad tech perspective and getting educated and knowledgeable. So just want to thank you for the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Noor. I'm very excited for this conversation.
So I wanted to start off with a really kind of baseline question over here around ad tech education. And that is, why is it more important now than it ever has been before?
Yeah, I'd say there's a few reasons. So one is the obvious point of the pace of change in our industry is accelerating. And, every year we say, oh, it's changing faster this year than ever. And hey, guess what? We're going to say that every year. We're going to keep saying that year after year after year, because that's how technology works, right? Technology exponentially kind of increases pace of change. And that's true for our industry as well. So in a fast moving industry that's only getting faster and faster, in order to be effective in your role, whether you're a buyer, whether you're a seller, whether you're, an operator, a builder, or, somebody commercializing products, you have to stay on the cutting edge of the space. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do those things effectively. So pace of change, number one, obvious thing. Number two, I think really interesting in our industry is we're seeing a lot of convergence right now between ad tech and martech, between social media and programmatic advertising, linear and streaming. You go down the line, everything is converging. And I think in the past, let's say 10 years ago, we had these little bubbles, and we still have bubbles, but the bubbles are starting to coalesce. They're starting to come together. And so, I'll use a simple example. If you used to be, somebody that worked at DSPs and could talk DSP all day long, and you were really good at it, maybe 10 years ago, that was totally fine. You were in a bubble, you were in your lane, you're doing a great job building, commercializing, et cetera. But today, if you're commercializing a DSP, you also need to know how to talk about CDPs, right? You also need to know how to talk about data clean rooms. You also need to know how to talk about MarTech more broadly. You need to know how to talk about cloud, because everything is starting to converge. All these areas are starting to converge. And because of that convergence, people have this increased need to be upskilled, right? That person that was able to talk DSP, well, it's cool to say, hey, now you need to talk CDP, but how do they talk CDP? You can't just flip a switch and talk CDP. CDPs are a whole part of the Lumascape on their own. They require actual formal learning and formal upskilling and knowledge, sharing and structured education for all intents and purposes, right? So I'd say pace of change, number one, convergence, number two. I think those are the two key things I want to highlight right now.
I think in so many ways you're already addressing this next question, but what is it in particular that people have to lose by not leveling up and having an intentional plan in place?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to use another example or analogy. As you can tell, I like doing that. So if you think back, let's say to the paper industry, right? Or the oil industry, right? If you're somebody that was kind of in these industries 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, those industries, because they're not necessarily technology, you could argue they're technology industries today, but they didn't used to be. Those industries didn't change very fast, right? Once you're in it, you know how it works. Then it's all about okay, who are the key players? Do I build relationships? Et cetera, right? Now, today we're in a technological space. You have to be tech savvy, and the pace of change, like I said, is increasing, right? So I think mentality wise, we have inertia as humans, right? Societally, we have inertia. I think people have been slow to kind of get to this idea of oh no, I am in ad tech or martech. I've been in this for 20 years, but I actually need to be in some kind of structured learning program to be able to keep up with everything and learn about all the things I know. I'm not going to just learn it through osmosis, right? Because there's so much information and because of the pace of the change, because of convergence, right? So I think that kind of explains it in a nutshell. That's why you need formal education. We're not in the paper industry from the 1980s, right? We're not in oil from the 1960s and 70s. We're in a fast-paced technology industry, and you have to stay on top of it. And listen, reading headlines is great. That's the first step. A lot of people aren't even doing some of that, right? So like having an intellectual curiosity and going out and reading some of those things is great. But I think there's a difference between structured education and reading headlines, because like reading headlines, a lot of times the purpose of that content is not to educate. The purpose of that content maybe is to inform. And I think that's an important nuance, right? If I'm reading an article, that journalist or that reporter is trying to give me all the information associated with that news story, but they're not necessarily trying to teach me what happened in that partnership or what to take away for it or what it means for the industry moving forward or how it applies to my day to day. They're not trying to teach me those things. They're trying to inform me about what happened. And so reading articles is very different than learning about what is going on.
Who needs to get educated out there? I think there's so many different parties that can benefit from it, and it's not as narrow in scope as some may think. I'd love to know who are some of those audiences that are leaning in to you and are getting a lot of benefit from it.
I mean, I'm biased, so I'm going to say everybody, right? Like everybody needs it to a certain extent. You'll be surprised. We get all sorts of different personas saying, hey, we need this. We get newcomers to the industry. That's an obvious one, right? If you're new to the space, obviously there's no degree for Adtech and MarTech in college. And so typically in the past, like we've just put people on the job and said, learn through osmosis. Hey, there's a better way. We don't have to do it that way and like waste, the first 3 years of someone's career just learning through osmosis. You can actually teach them some of these things. So that's kind of persona number one. Persona number two, I'd say, is people that have been in the space for a long time, 15, 20, 25 years. They're commercial people, they're sales people, they're account people, they're strategy people, they're marketing people, and they just have a need to keep up and also like get upskilled on those adjacent areas that are outside their bubble that they need to learn about to do their jobs better. So I'd say that's another persona. You'd be surprised, but we get a lot of leadership teams coming to us, CROs, CEOs, CTOs saying, hey, like, I have to run a big company. That's more than a full-time job, but that means I can't keep up with all this stuff that I need to learn about. Can you help create like a leadership track for the things we need to know about? So leadership training. I think on the buy side, you have marketers and agency folks that, they're getting pitched all the time by vendors, but the pitches are obviously all biased. And so they have a need to kind of get more unbiased, objective knowledge so that they can make better buying decisions. I think back office folks and engineers and product people, that's a really interesting use case as well, because those folks, a lot of times, especially technical folks, they may not come from this industry. They may have great engineering skills, but they were from some other place, building SaaS products or something completely different. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, build an ad tech thing. And the context of ad tech really matters if you're going to build. All sorts of personas. We've kind of mapped out at U of Digital, like what all the different personas need, what level of depth they need, whether you're new to the industry or you're very senior. But frankly, everyone has a use case for education and knowledge.
On a previous episode, I've spoken to a couple different people on this topic. And I think a repeated theme is something you just brought up, which is that the proxy for education outside of headlines or industry trades is sales collateral, which is highly biased material and definitely incomplete. And that's the baseline for so many people who are getting educated in this space. So there's massive gaps and space for, more learning.
Yeah. And I think to that point, right? Like I credit the big tech companies and all of the tech companies that are trying to educate their customers through like Google has a thing called Skillshop and Facebook has Blueprint, and all these things are great. And they have some really great material. A lot of it ends up becoming a bit of a product pitch, because that's the point. That's why they're doing it in the first place. They want people to learn about, yes, the industry, but from their lens and from their point of view, which then guides people to buy their thing. I think having objective information and knowledge and education is critical.
At Basis 2, we have a program called Adtech Academy, and we have an incredible team that's focused on education, but we have our scope. Our scope corresponds to whether it's our product suite, our service suite, and goes maybe a little bit beyond, but there's so much more, right? To your point, as far as adjacencies and tangential information that can really expand learning. All of these organizations, whether it's like the really big guys or everybody in between, they have a little bit of a more narrow parameter. So there's need for more education for sure. I wanted to dive into some points with you around what are some trouble areas that people have consistently struggled with. And maybe we can talk about one or two different points, but I'm sure you're very familiar with what people are struggling with.
I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to caveat it, right? So my caveat is like, depending on where you sit in the industry, your experience level, your job function, the company you work at, there are different answers. And so it's hard to kind of make a blanket statement on that. I would say right now, if you kind of like froze this moment, right now, AI is top of mind for everybody, right? Just in terms of like learning about it. What is it? How does it work? What's the future hold? And so right now, that's probably our most popular kind of request of like, hey, teach us about AI in advertising, in marketing, in ad tech, martech, et cetera. So I'd say that's number one. I'd say number two is probably CTV. I think connected TV is such a big opportunity in our industry and everyone recognizes that. It's changing super fast like everything else. We're trying to smash together linear TV principles with digital principles. And that's connected TV right now. And like you have people from different sides. You have linear TV buyers, you have more digital buyers. And that creates like this big mishmash of confusion and complexity. And that's how we're building products, right? Like we still, for example, measure CTV using old school linear TV measurement methods, right? We still track GRPs and TRPs for CTV buys, which is crazy, but we do that, right? And that's an inertia thing. That's a traditional media thing. And so, I'd say like emerging channels in general, right? I kind of highlighted CTV, but any kind of channel or format that is transitioning, let's say from more traditional means into a more digital means, right? So that's digital out of home. That's streaming audio. I think those are the key ones, right? CTV, streaming audio, digital out of home. Those are kind of the key channels right now that are making that transition. And that creates a lot of complexity, which people don't feel comfortable with and need to learn about and need to unpack.
So let's dive a little more into the CTV piece. It's very obvious why there's so much interest in CTV. There's, if you're on the sell side, there's the most money to be made. And I guess that trickles down the supply chain. What is it that people are struggling with the most? I think it's clear in many cases, but I'd love to hear from you what those struggle points are for CTV.
Sure. I think first of all, like CTV, it's so complex on the supply side and the content side first, right? So like you have content that originates with one party, but then that content can be distributed in so many different ways, right? It could be distributed directly from that publisher. It can go into like an MVPD. It can be packaged in with like a, SVOD or AVOD app. Streamed live. It can be sold linearly. Like there's like 25 different ways in which a piece of content, TV content, can make its way to a user. And that in itself creates all sorts of complexity in terms of how that content can be monetized. And I think unpacking that and understanding that is the root of the education gap. And then you get into the nuances of like, because we were trying to make this bridge between linear and CTV, the measurement is complex. So we train a lot on the measurement, right? Of how can it be measured? Also, the targetability and the data aspect of CTV is very complex, right? What can you target? How can you target them? What's actually real and what is not? How do these ID solutions work for CTV? So I think that's pretty complex, right? So I'd say it's measurement, it's targeting and identity. And then last but not least, it is kind of just understanding the ecosystem of players, right? Because, in classic ad tech fashion, CTV has its own Lumascape now with a bunch of different boxes. And it's like, okay, well, you're a content producer, but you control everything through your own app. Oh, but no, there's another content producer that only distributes through third-party apps. Okay, well, there's like 3 buckets within the content producer square. Now we get to OEMs, right? OEMs, there's like the Rokus and the Samsungs and the LGs of the world. But then there's like Comcast because they're technically an OEM as well or a device owner. And then there's all sorts of blurred lines and different boxes within that box. Then you get into Adtech and it's like, oh, we have CTV specific SSPs. We have CTV specific DSPs. Now we have startups that are just like, like Vibe and the Jam Loop, right? And these guys are just focused maybe on the mid-market and they're a CTV DSP for those guys, right? So it's like, there is a lot of complexity and just understanding the ecosystem of players. And so that's another area where we're having to educate a lot.
A question I get most frequently from people on the agency side and the brand side, anybody who's responsible for buying, is the classic measurement question. So to go back to something you mentioned earlier, Shiv, it's that how do we convert this rating point system into one that is equitable and that my client can respect when it seems like this dust still hasn't settled on what's going to be standardized in the CTV world? How do you start to have that conversation with media buyers?
My perspective is that I don't think we will standardize it. I don't think we will. And there's a few reasons for that. Like linear TV was a very clear-cut advertising medium in terms of what it is trying to achieve, which is more upper funnel type of outcomes for whom. And there were a few kind of publishers that controlled a lot of that inventory and sold it in a very specific way. And so it's easy for us to agree all on like a general kind of way to measure this. Digital is a whole other ballgame. When you think about like the way you can target people, the calls to action and the things that people can do after seeing an ad on TV now with QR codes and things like that. And so all of a sudden now you are selling advertising to people in more targeted ways with different desired outcomes up and down the funnel through all sorts of different tech. And that then just, it opens up the box that is digital advertising. And so if you think about the way we measure in digital advertising, there's 15 gazillion different ways to do it. There's brand lift studies, there's conversion tracking and attribution, there's MMM, there's MTA, there's tons and tons and tons of different ways to measure with different types of data. And that's where we're going with TV. Like I think brands and advertisers have to actually get comfortable with that idea, learn about all the different ways to measure. I understand why it feels like a curse. It's actually a blessing, right? Because the reason we were doing linear TV in this very uniform way is because the only way we could buy and sell TV and the only thing we could achieve was a very basic thing. So that's my kind of viewpoint on like, we're not going to have standardization in CTV. And that's actually a good thing because it helps advertisers figure out like, how do I actually measure what I am trying to achieve based on my goals?
I want to shift over into another topic. I think you mentioned two big ones. I think the other one was AI. And I'd love if you could frame the AI side of things, thinking about it from the perspective of like a media buyer or somebody who's responsible for programmatic campaigns. And I'll just like set the table a little bit as far as where we're hearing a lot of energy is, of course, AI has a myriad of applications, but specifically when we've been talking about it for programmatic, it's like, oh, we have all these AI solutions. But what we actually mean is that we already had stuff in place and it's not actually new type of AI. And a lot of these solutions are smoke and mirror solutions. I can't imagine you get any shortage of questions around how much of this is legit. How do I even understand what like AI means pertaining to me? Because I think what people are looking for is advancement. They're looking for some sort of new emerging opportunity to level up and solve for challenges that they're currently facing. And people are trying to distract them with a new title on an old thing. Wanted to get your thoughts and how you've been addressing AI for media buyers.
Yeah, 100%. So I think there's a few answers to that. So first of all, machine learning has always been around, right? It's been around forever. And so, hey, everybody, let's be cautious about when we use the term AI, are we talking about machine learning, which is totally fine to do, right? Because machine learning, if the machine is actually learning and getting smarter and taking data and getting better and better and better, that's literally the definition of AI. But machine learning is very different than what AI, let's say, has become in the last couple of years since ChatGPT launched. And now, we kind of talk about AI as being synonymous with LLMs or NLP, natural language processing. And so, first of all, let's figure out which one is it? Is it that or is it machine learning? And machine learning we've been doing for a long time. Is it a new thing or is it a branding exercise? Is it a marketing exercise that, somebody's coming and pitching to me just like a rebranded version, but it's actually just machine learning and they slap a new logo on it or a new, label on it. So there's that. The other thing I'd say is like, it's really important, I think, to talk about AI starting from the use cases, right? So like, again, classic industry and technology problem. We talk about the technology and how cool it is and what it might be able to do, but we don't actually talk about the business problem we're trying to solve first. That's where we should always start, right? Like start from the use case, start from the business problem, and then go backwards from there and figure out like, oh, okay, well, maybe AI is a solution to this thing that I'm trying to achieve. When we are training marketers and buyers on AI, we're literally breaking down all the things that marketers have to do. So that's planning, that's execution, that's optimization, that's measurement and analytics. Let's go through each of these tasks that we have to do as buyers and think about now, okay, here are the problems. And then are there ways in which AI, whether that's machine learning or LLMs or natural language processing or some other form of AI that I'm not even talking about right now, can solve those things? And if there are, let's talk through how those things work, which tools exist out there. And that way we make it tangible, right? We're actually solving a business problem, right? And that's like, frankly, how we like to educate. It's about actually learning in a way that's applicable to what you do. One more thing to add, I'd say is like AI, like any tool, people are more likely to understand it and want to use it when they actually start using it for their own life. That's what creates behavioral change. Hey, I bought the Google Home, and so now I understand voice a little bit better, right? Or I have a smart TV, so now I understand like the tile ads on my smart TV better, right? A lot of what we're seeing with AI right now, which is bonkers to me, we're 2 years into this and it's going to revolutionize everything. A lot of people still aren't comfortable going to ChatGPT and saying like, help me write an email, right? Or like dissect this report, or here's a PDF. Can I ask you a few questions about what's in here in this 30-page PDF, right? Instead of me going through manually and reading all of it. And so we're trying to get people to apply it to their regular life a little bit, to start creating the behavioral change where they will start opening their mind by themselves organically to how it can be applied in other areas in their work, potentially, right? So that's another aspect of what we're trying to do with the AI training, is like just create behavioral change by getting people in there, getting them using it, even for simple things.
I know we went through 2 topics and I want to backpedal a little bit, correlated with some things that you said about TV. And the fact is that the standardization of the past is not something that's going to apply to the future. It's something that me and my team have been talking about constantly across this year. People have misconceptions. People who have been in the advertising space for a long time. What you said to me, 5 minutes ago, you've probably said that hundreds of times to people. And there are people who are not willing to accept it. So I'm curious to ask you, not just specifically related to CTV, but are there a couple of areas that people can't abandon the past that they're so addicted to? And how do you try to help people get to a place where they can accept that this is a misconception and we need to start thinking about this, whatever that thing is they need to get educated on?
Yeah, it's a great question. My mind just goes to one place, and it's kind of full circle here. Like, it's measurement. It's measurement. Measurement is what validates or disproves the value of everything we do in this space in terms of marketing and advertising. If we measure it and the measurement tells us it didn't work, then we're not going to do it anymore. If we measure it and it says it worked, we're going to do more of it, right? And we're going to keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And so measurement fundamentally in our industry is broken because of inertia, because of the old ways of doing things, right? So, just some examples. Last click attribution, I think, is a broken way of measuring. I don't blame marketers for being hooked to it. There's a lot of good reasons why they're hooked to it. It is not actually telling us what is good and what is bad. Even last view attribution, you can make the argument for that. GRPs and TRPs, a lot of these things are broken. And, when we talk about some of the problems downstream in our industry, content issues, brand safety issues, fraud issues, all of these problems that we have downstream in our industry can all be traced back to problems with how we measure. Because when we say something is good and we buy more of it, when it's not actually good and it can be gamed, then that's where we get, nefarious activity and fraud and, bad content, et cetera, right? If I serve an ad and it drove a last click conversion or a last view conversion, but it was served on a garbage MFA website, we're basically supporting that website. We're basically saying, hey, good job, pat on the back, keep doing what you're doing. And so that's the thing that is hardest. I'll go back to what I was saying a minute ago, which is like people are hooked to some of these antiquated ways of measuring because, listen, at the end of the day, you have to be able to explain to your CFO why you're doing what you're doing. And the CFOs don't understand. There's a big education gap there. And they're like, well, last year you drove, X many click conversions for me. I want to see what you're doing this year. And I don't want to hear a story about how click conversions are broken. That's what I understand. I'm the CFO, right? So we have to answer to our CFO. We have to look good on spreadsheets. And in order to look good on spreadsheets, you have to show year over year, month over month, apples to apples comparisons. You can't just say, hey, I'm completely changing how I measure things. Like, that's hard to do. That's got to come from the CMO down, or even the CEO or the CFO down. And changing that is hard. Those people in the leadership suite don't understand some of this stuff. They need the knowledge and the education so they can change. And so that's why we're stuck to it. That's why we're addicted to it. But it needs to change if our industry is going to improve and get better.
It's making me think of what these needs are for a lot of people who report to people in the C-suite or the executive suite, wherever their organization is. Maybe they're in charge of media buying or just overarching campaigns, and they're struggling with exactly what you described. And they're also struggling with the sources from which they gather information. So even if I seek knowledge from whomever it is that I seek it from, I ultimately need to sit down with partners and evaluate and see if what they're offering is in fact going to meet my needs. And let's say it's from the spectrum of measurement. Measurement's been another space where there's been no shortage of smoke and mirror type of players. Attribution is a space where there's like maybe the vast majority of smoke and mirrors. I'm sure some people will not like to hear me saying that. It's just so very true. Like people build these glass houses and they can be knocked down easily, but sometimes you don't know until you test and learn. So I think that's where people really are seeking a lot of education. How do I know that I know enough so that I'm not wasting my time signing up for something that's going to be a waste of my client or whoever, that their needs are being met? So if you were to address a question like that, how do you make sure somebody knows enough so that they're not getting scammed? Seems like a strong word, but like essentially so that they're not getting tied up in something that they don't want to be, associated with.
Like, I think that's tricky, right? Because on one hand, yeah, you want to be able to kind of say, no, listen, this is how I do things and this is how I've set it up. And I believe in that. On the other hand, you want to have a mentality of like, always be learning and keep your mind open. And maybe you're not doing it the right way. And so always be scoping out what's out there and keep an open mind. I think with measurement in particular, right now, we're at a really interesting moment where there's a lot of stuff going on. There's signal loss, right? So we're losing a lot of our tracking mechanisms. There's new types of signal coming in that makes things, more difficult. Walled gardens are putting up their walls. It's hard to get data out, et cetera. Fragmentation of partners and channels. We talked about channels earlier, like CTV is different from streaming, audio is different from display, from social. And so measurement is getting harder and harder and harder. And I think in this moment, you have to be open-minded. You have to do a few things. One is like, you have to always be questioning what is your source of truth. You always have to be gut checking your source of truth. I actually think the idea of a source of truth is almost becoming antiquated in a way, because there is actually no right answer anymore to measurement. You have to constantly be triangulating multiple different methodologies and approaches to measurement to constantly be gut checking what's actually real and what's not. And so I think almost like taking that mentality is the right approach of like, no, I have to keep gut checking everything. I'm going to keep questioning, the source of truth or the measurement that I have in place. Because at the end of the day, with everything in flux and everything changing, like if I get set in my ways, I'm going to extrapolate a little bit, but like you're just like playing out the next version of last click attribution, right? Like in a microcosm of like this current environment. I think it's almost like, hey, don't say you know enough. Always be questioning and get your organization and the people around you to have that same mentality. And that's what's going to help you drive outcomes and drive your business forward, right? Because at the end of the day, right, marketing is not about the number of conversions you got in your spreadsheet. Marketing is about, hey, did my business grow from last year to this year? And if you're keeping that lens and then questioning all the measurement underneath it to get to that result and get to that outcome, I think that's when you know you're doing a good job.
I want to ask you a specific question about the tech stack. You mentioned many different elements that are associated with it and that there's tangential learning that needs to take place. So I have my specific role, but then there's this halo effect or ripple effect where I need to learn about these other things. And I'm just framing the question to ask, how much does a non-technical professional need to learn about some of these different elements in the tech stack, especially when they don't have the opportunity to really like dive in on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I love that question. I mean, most of our learners, Noor, are non-technical audiences, right? We're training a lot of business people, right? Salespeople, account people, media buyers, strategy people, marketing people, et cetera, right? So we deal with these folks a lot. And frankly, like there's too much to learn. There's too many subject matters. There's too many domains. There's too much technology to expect yourself to go a mile deep on everything. You don't need to. What you need to be able to do is understand the strategic big picture. You need to understand where all of the things kind of fit and what purposes they serve, what use cases they serve, why they exist. You need to be somewhat of a thought leader and you need to be opinionated about some of these things, not all of them. You don't need to always have an opinion, but you need to have some thoughtful opinions about the things that are relevant to, let's say, your partners or your customers or your key constituents or to your business. Those are the things you need to know, right? It's like what matters to the people I work with, what matters to the outcome I'm trying to drive out of my role. And I think that's where like people fall down a lot because they don't think that certain things matter when they do, right? So it's just kind of expanding your aperture, opening your mind to like, oh, okay, I sell a DSP. In the last 5 meetings I've had with customers, the term data clean rooms has come up. And I didn't know it. I didn't understand. I don't understand why it exists. I don't understand what purpose it serves. Or maybe even I did, but I didn't have thoughtful opinions about it. Okay, that's an area where I need to go get more conversant. I don't need to get technical. I don't need to access a UI and actually set up a data integration. I don't need to do that. But I need to know what it is. I need to know like what use cases it serves so I can talk to it about my customers. That's how I'm going to do a good job, right? So by no means do I encourage everyone to go out and learn everything and go a mile deep? That's unreasonable. I can't do that. You can't do that. Nobody can do that. There's too much. But what you need to think about is what job do you do? What outcome are you trying to achieve? And where are your blind spots, right? Or knowledge gaps that are preventing you from doing that. And I guarantee you everyone has those. There's not a single person that is like, oh, I know all the things I need to know in order to do my job as effectively as possible.
What do you think about, I'm going to call it Adtech Twitter and just social spaces in general? Because we talked about some other sources that there is sales collateral. There is obviously educational resources that have been developed, like You Have Digital, amongst some other players out there. There's articles from the trades, which those people, they have a beat, but they're not, speaking of non-technical people, typically people who are writing about it are also non-technical. And then there are these thought leaders online that are speaking about it extensively. And a lot of people use that as a proxy for, I guess, education as well. This is kind of a question that's going a little bit of an outlier question. How often are you seeing something where you feel unaligned or you think, oh, the baseline of this person's understanding of this topic, it's not quite there? How do you internalize that? Because you're in the business of really knowing these things, because there's so much accountability that you need to take on in order to be an educator in this space. But when you see something that's not quite right and it's being publicly solicited for consumption by people in the ad tech world, what do you do?
I'll be the first one to say, like, you mentioned accountability. Yes, I have accountability, especially like when I'm formally in a learning environment. I don't feel that level of accountability on social media, whether for better or for worse. Like I'm out there kind of just trying to talk to people and learn and hear what's going on. And honestly, sometimes have fun with it because sometimes I think we take ourselves too seriously in the industry. So I think it's a nice outlet. But I think the key thing with social media is like taking it for what it is. People go to social media to be whimsical, to get, a break, to get entertained, to, listen to thought leaders and like hear opinions. Social media is all about opinions and not necessarily facts and reality. And so I think if you go into social media with that mindset, you'll do well and you'll take away valuable stuff from it. But you have to have that grain of salt with everything you get. Also, a lot of times on social media, like people are using social media as a marketing channel, right? Whether that's, to propagate their own opinions or their company's, viewpoints or what have you. Like that's what social media is, it's a marketing channel. There's a lot of value there, 100%. Like also just the speed of social media, oh, this company just bought this other company. What does it mean? I'm getting that from Twitter and LinkedIn. I'm not getting that from a press release. I'm not getting that from a blog post from the companies. And so there's a lot of value there in terms of speed and like quick hit information. But again, everything I think on social media should be taken with that grain of salt of like, people are going there with an angle. People are going there to be whimsical. People are going there to share their opinions. People are going there to be entertained. And if you can take that mindset into it, I think there's a lot of value to be had.
Where do you think the ad tech / digital media programmatic industry has failed to resonate with audiences as far as actually educating them? And I'll give a little bit more context around that question. So often you'll go to a conference and people, to go back to the agenda piece, people have their talking points. They've worked with their marketing team. Now they have their best executives up on stage saying something as like, this is objectively true. It is something where people are trying to like determine, like, am I learning something new? Is this true? Is this just true with your technology? Is this an actual opportunity for me to learn? Just again, curious for your opinions in these types of other spaces, which also I left it out when I shared earlier, like places of learning. In theory, you would go to a conference as a space for learning, but everything is sponsored. So it is another space where you take things with a grain of salt. Just again, curious for your thoughts in that space as well.
Yeah, 100%. Listen, I think like, and this goes back to what we were talking about with like the academies, right? There's a lot of value in all of these forums, whether that's conferences, social media, vendor provided academies. There's a lot of rich content. You definitely shouldn't dismiss it. You just have to go in eyes wide open of like, who is telling me this? What is their angle? And if I can remember that and kind of caveat everything I'm hearing, then I can get a lot of value out of this. And I feel the same way about conferences. You shouldn't ever go into like a sponsored panel expecting to come away with the objective truth and nothing but the truth. Like you should come in expecting to hear opinions and angles. And like, a lot of times it's very valuable to know the angles of these companies. As long as you go in with the eyes wide open of like, this is not just going to be objective truths. This is going to be, an angle, and that's okay. And I can still benefit from that. I think you're fine. Right. And I think you're fine in most forums. Very rarely do I go into sure, there's like webinars that are just garbage and it's just like fluff and nothing material there. Sure, there's plenty of panels like that too, where they just say like the words and the jargon. There's a lot of garbage. So sure, obviously like have that filter, but there's also plenty of those situations where it's very valuable, even though there's an angle.
Yeah, the opportunity is to observe how people choose to position and then like make a note of it. Very much agree with that. And that's important, right? Like your mention of the Lumascape earlier, it feels like an infinite volume of micro Lumascapes out. They're not micro, they're big Lumascapes out there. And despite M&A activity, there's new actors popping up all the time in new spaces. Sometimes it feels like there's overlap. So maybe that can be one of these final questions I'm moving towards. Probably should have asked this earlier. Sometimes it just feels so overwhelming. And you had said earlier that you can't know everything. Nobody can know everything, but you want to know enough. Do you ever advise on how often you should be leaning into educating yourself? Because you have a lot of other responsibilities. How do you set aside enough time to feel like you're chipping away enough to be knowledgeable?
Great question. Couple thoughts. First of all, being okay and being comfortable with the idea that I'm never going to know enough and I'm not going to know everything is the first step. Knowing that you're not always going to know is good. Like that's step one. Step two is like, I don't think I'm a fair comparison for folks that are actually like working at companies and building products and things like that. Cause I'm in a very fortunate position of my job is to teach. My company's job is to teach and educate. Right. And because, I don't know if you've heard this saying, but like, the best way to learn is to teach. When you teach somebody, you got to go learn it. You have accountability to the information. And so we're in this fortunate position where like we have to be learning all the time in order to teach. And so for me, like that's my job, right? Is constantly learning, constantly reading, constantly asking questions. And so, if I was to say to other people, like it goes back to the question you asked earlier, you have to feel confident. Being confident is important, that you know the things you need to know to do your job effectively. And also knowing that there's always going to be more. And I know I'm kind of like talking on both sides of my mouth. I'm saying both sides of it, but that is reality, right? Like that's the reality of our situation is like on one side, have that confidence. And if you don't, go out and get there, right? And like learn the things you need to know in order to do your job effectively. And then also be confident in knowing that you're not always going to know, right? And you're always going to need to be learning more. So that's kind of my like very wishy-washy abstract answer.
No, I think that framing is something that I have encountered maybe more so in the past. And it's because I used to ask more binary questions in front of audiences where I say, do you know about X? And then people, I think, felt pressure to say yes. But yes to what? What is it that you know? So now I'll ask many more, qualitative questions. Tell me what it is that you know, and let's go from there as far as really understanding where there's opportunity to like fill a gap and or find where are there potentially misconceptions? Where do we have differing opinions? How can we get more aligned? And that scenario that has application for every single person that not only works in the adtech space, that works for everybody who works on anything ever. And it's just adtech happens to be so incredibly complex. So from there, I wanted to ask you one or two last questions to round us out. One of them being to just learn about a little bit more about you and your process. What does Shiv Gupta do to stay informed? Are there foundational or fundamental things, just topics that people really should educate themselves on so that when they do read the trades, when they do get exposed to all these things you described, they can feel more comfortable knowing that you're not going to know everything, but there are actually some things you absolutely need to know?
I could say a bunch of things that are true for different types of people and personas. So it's hard to give one answer, but my one answer right now in this moment, March 2025, is go learn about AI. Please go learn about AI. Everyone's talking about AI. Every article has something to do with AI. Every company's rebranding itself as AI. Learn about AI. Our whole world is going to be very different in a few years. It's like the internet, like how the world changed from 95 to 2005. That's going to happen in a condensed period of time over the next few years. And you want to be ahead of that curve, right? If there's one thing I would encourage you all to listen to or learn about right now, it's AI.
If there were some other topics, like in my mind, there is the never-ending challenge of understanding addressability / targetability and, to your point, measurement. Are there things about any one of those more foundational topics? Because to your point, you could say a million things, right? You could say every emerging platform, every emerging technology, every part of the tech stack, that would all be seemingly valid as a foundation. If you are a programmatic buyer or you're responsible for campaigns, since that's like a classic angle for us, I feel like things pertaining to identity, measurement, and attribution, they're table stakes and that everybody wants to know about them, but they don't know as much about them as they would like. How would you advise someone if that was their baseline? What should they be doing to learn more about those types of topics?
I mean, listen, the word data is nebulous. I'm going to say like all things data, to your point, right? Like understand what kind of data exists out there, how it can be used, how it can be tracked, how it can be used for different, parts of, let's say, a campaign process and the planning process, the execution process, activation, optimization, measurement, analytics. Like data, right? If you don't understand something about where data is coming from, how it is being used, the output, then that's an area to get smarter. And I even think like tying it back to AI, in the world of AI, UIs are going to become defunct, right? We're going to start talking to things. We're going to have agents doing things for us. Gone are going to be the days of I log into a thing and I click some buttons and it does tasks for me. Those days are going to go away pretty soon. And so I think you have to think about like what underpins what we're trying to do and where there's differentiation, and it's going to come from data. And so I think all things data.
I love that answer. I love landing the plane there. I know there's so much that you can say about what's happening in the ad tech and programmatic and digital marketing and digital media world. We'll have to have you back another time to talk about something additional. And I just want to thank you for the time today, Shiv.
Yeah, thanks, Noor, for having me on. This was a really fun conversation, and I'm excited to maybe do it again one day.
Thanks to Shiv Gupta, founder of U of Digital, for sharing how AdTech pros can level up their education and training. Staying ahead has become more complex and labyrinthine than ever before, making continuous learning essential. If you want to learn more, a good place to start is U of Digital's newsletter, which you can sign up for at the letters U of, that's the letter U, of.digital/newsletter. And while you're there, you can learn more about their other programming. You can also check out Basis's website's Resource Center to find more education resources and insights. You can also check out Adtech Academy, which offers free courses, learning paths, and certifications. That's it for now. Another Adtech Unfiltered episode coming up soon.